Life in Germany test. Please use this paper to help amend and correct and annotate the exam paper that you've undertaken in class. Question 1 then. Define the key words. 1 mark for a simple or vague response. 2 marks for a developed, accurate statement. Firstly, totalitarian. Total control over a whole group of people. No freedom of speech. Liberal. A country where free views are expressed. A country that's more laid back. A country that is tolerant and willing to accept the ideas of others, even if they are different to your own. Repressive is essentially the opposite of liberal. It's about restrictions on people's personal freedoms, restraining people and ordering how they control and behave themselves. Racial is a means of discriminating against groups of people who are different, be it religion or be it colour. And eugenics. Eugenics is the science of how to produce the perfect offspring by selecting the right characteristics in a husband. What is the difference between education and indoctrination? Education is about teaching facts and opinions that might be different to your own and challenge your own existing ideas. Indoctrination is the policy of brainwashing children into believing what you want them to believe, by only teaching the facts and ideas that you believe are appropriate. What is the difference between respect and obedience? Respect is being polite and treating others how you wish to be treated yourself. You do this because you want to. It's a matter of choice. Obedience, however, is when you do what you are told to do because you have to, not necessarily because you want to or you like the people. Chronology. 1 mark for matching each of the years to the correct event. It became compulsory to join the Hitler Youth in 1936. Please note here, it's an example of a law that was brought in after the Nazis are well established in power. Introducing the Mother's Cross, rewarding women. They made up more than half the population. This occurred in 1933, a popular move, so one that was introduced early. The taking over of all youth movements, again, contentious, so it's later, 1936. Marriage loan scheme. The Nazis believed that the family was key to the future of Germany. That was introduced as early as 1933. Divorce laws were changed in 1938. Interesting to see that this comes after the race laws of Nuremberg at 1935, because of course these directly affected Aryans. And finally, the compulsory duty year for women, 1937, which was also the year in which Hitler announced his intention to go to war, so all tied in together. Question 3 on Nazi education. How did Hitler plan to preserve and protect the Thousand-Year Reich from beyond the grave? The plan was to brainwash the children, the future generations, into believing Nazi ideas. They will in turn pass their ideas on to the next generation. So it's establishing totalitarianism from an early point. What subjects were important in the Nazi curriculum and why? For 5 marks. 1 mark here please for each subject and for a reason for why that subject was taught for the 2nd mark. If you've listed the subject, you can only get a maximum of 2 marks. So even if all 5 are listed, we would only be awarding 2 marks because this is simply memory. This here, however, is understanding and applying. So the subjects that were taught were PE, history, biology, German and geography. PE, much more provision on the timetable. The idea of fitness and readiness for war, contact sports and so on and so forth. Planning the boys to prepare for the army, planning the women to be fit for having families. History would concentrate on the rise of the Nazi Party, would concentrate wholly on German history, selective of course, and would focus on areas where the Nazis wanted the Germans to understand how they were disadvantaged by the Treaty of Versailles, for example. Biology would be a science to fit in with the idea of Aryanism, social Darwinism. German would be the equivalent of English in our curriculum. So the children would be taught books and literature that talked about German culture to the exclusion of others. Certain themes would also become more prevalent in these books, like German heroes, the role of the Hitler Youth, and conflict. Finally, geography would focus on German geography, the need for living space, and possibly the land that was taken from Germany during the Treaty of Versailles. Why did boys have different timetables to girls? This case was because the boys and girls were both raised for a different purpose in life. Boys were meant to be the soldiers and the providers, the farmers and the fighters. So they needed to be physically fit and understand self-discipline and how to take orders. Girls, on the other hand, were expected to be more domesticated, to stay at home, to be maternal, to be wives, to look after their husbands and raise children. Question 4 on the Hitler Youth. What attracted and made young people loyal to Hitler Youth? Now, the clear distinction here has been identified. We must make a clear distinction between the examples provided for the Hitler Youth and not what they did at school. So people were attracted to the Hitler Youth because they were able to support their country. It was their patriotic duty. They were able to learn skills that they wouldn't have been allowed to learn at school or weren't practical to teach at school. There was peer pressure from both friends and family. It was hard to be successful in Nazi Germany if your children weren't doing what they were meant to do. Pleasing Hitler was something that children were raised to want to aspire to do. Certainly the boys were given the opportunity to handle equipment and handle weapons and knives, things that they would otherwise not be able to do. And finally, they took an oath of loyalty, which culturally was considered to be highly important and very, very significant in the lives of boys. How and what were the boys prepared for? 1 mark for the correct answer and 1 mark for the example from the Hitler Youth. The boys were prepared for war, and examples of this were close combat, contact sports, very important. Fitness, 60-metre run in 12 seconds, jumping 2 3/4 metres, cross-country marches for 1.5 days. What were the girls prepared to do, and how did they do this? Girls were not prepared for military service, but for domestic service in Germany. They were taught cooking and cleaning and sewing. What did the Nazis dislike about the swing youth? 1 mark for each of the following, a maximum of 3 marks. They were not part of the Hitler Youth, meaning that Hitler didn't have total control. They weren't a significant number, but Hitler didn't look at his successes, he looked at the failings. So any kid not actually joining the Hitler Youth was the problem. Secondly, they listened to foreign music that Hitler had banned in Germany. Black jazz, English music, either unpatriotic or what he called degenerate music. They wore English-style clothing, not the military dress of the Hitler Youth. Some were even known to say Heil Benny in reference to the band leader Benny Goodman instead of Heil Hitler. And finally, they were tolerant of the Jews in their organisation, something that was absolutely central to Hitler's policy, which was obviously not to tolerate the Jews. Women in Nazi Germany. In what areas have the women succeeded under the Weimar government? Well, we've already established that the Weimar government was tolerant and liberal. Women were allowed to enter the professions. They could be doctors, lawyers, and teachers. They could go to university and get their degrees and then practice. Women were able to be MPs and sit in the Reichstag. They were allowed to dress as they wished. They could wear makeup and smoke. Whom they married was a matter of their own personal choice. Again, Germany under the Weimar Republic was tolerant, equal, and accepting. What were the 3 Ks Hitler said women should stick to? Kinder, Kirche, Küche. Children, church, kitchen. What decline most alarmed the Nazis into forcibly changing the role of women? Why was reversing this decline important? 2 marks for this one. First and foremost, the declining birth rate. There were fewer men. Times were hard. People were less inclined to have big families. In the long term, Germany would need a raised birth rate at least equal to that of her potential enemies in order to have an army able not only to win a war, but to seize the living space that the German people would need in order to live. Why did the rearmament of Germany cause problems and contradictions with previous policies towards women? Rearming Germany with a better army and supply of weapons. If the men joined the army, women needed to stay back and work. Previously, the Nazis had wanted women to stay at home and look after the family. But later, in the 1930s, when those men were joining the armed forces and subsequently fighting in a war, the Nazis pragmatically asked women to go back and work outside the home. Wasn't their idea policy, but it's what was required at the time. How successful were the Germans in changing the role of women? It was a partial success. They removed women from their jobs and they were controlled in how they behaved at home. More people got married and the birth rate went up. However, when the time was required, because of the outbreak of war, the Nazis pragmatically allowed the women to go back to the workplace. So it was partial success. Question 6. Essay question. The Nazis failed in their attempt to win the hearts and the minds of the German people. Do you agree with this statement? Do you agree questions require you to provide both sides of the argument before reaching a conclusion? Now, alternatively, you can know what the answer is and state that in your introduction, but again, you are still expected to provide the evidence both for and against the argument before confirming in your conclusion the conclusion that you came up with at the start. You should be aiming to write around 5 paragraphs. 2 models are set out here for you. An introduction, understanding the question, and maybe identifying what the actual conclusion will be. So that's standard on both these questions. Okay? You can agree that they failed, provide 2 reasons, and disagree. Either way, this is the balanced argument. It doesn't need to be equal in the amount that you've written, but we need both sides illustrated, reaching a conclusion. The alternative model is the contrary model, whereby overall you disagree and you provide 2 examples of why they disagree. Your mark scheme for the essay is down here. An unstructured, factual-based response. A narrative story. P and E without the analysis. Inconsistent PEA. Consistent PEA, reaching a conclusion.